Hello there, welcome everyone, and happy afternoon to you. My name is Rebecca Geyer. I work with the North Dakota DOT as a Planning and Asset Management Section Lead for Planning and Rail. I'm here to introduce our panel of esteemed individuals to talk about federal discretionary grants. We're here to talk about some tips and tricks and things to know when you're going into writing a grant and what you deal with on the other side. But we're not going to talk about any specific grant program or talk about projects that may or may not qualify, just to give you a little idea of the scope. But I'm going to start us out here by, who's going first? By introducing you to Mr. Kraig McLeod.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. As Rebecca said, my name is Kraig McLeod. I am the Engineering and Operations Team Supervisor with the FHWA North Dakota Division. So my intent here this afternoon is to go through a handful of slides to give examples of the resources that are available to you as an applicant and a potential recipient of a discretionary grant. Start off by talking about the scale of the opportunity in front of us, and as was mentioned this morning a couple of times, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, had a significant influx of additional federal funding, both through formula funds through the state DOTs, MPOs, and transit agencies, as well as through the discretionary grant programs. And just as an example, in federal fiscal year 23, which we're in the middle of right now, there's $32 billion available in discretionary grant funding. Having said that, DOT grant programs are typically oversubscribed, meaning there's more applicants than there are the funds available. Many require a non-federal match. They're provided on a reimbursable basis, and obviously federal funds come with federal requirements. The tool that I'm going to provide to you, or the resource that I'm going to provide to you today and discuss, is the DOT Navigator. DOT Navigator is an online website that was launched by US DOT last summer to make it easier for local public agencies, transportation stakeholders to identify resources that are out there as you consider applying for discretionary grants. It includes resources to help understand the federal grant making process and the federal requirements, provides resources on technical assistance, which I'll demonstrate here in just a second, and then provides information on the overall bipartisan infrastructure law. One of the main tools on the DOT Navigator website is an online searchable database to identify existing technical resources. This database is searchable by keyword, it's searchable by stakeholder type and resource type that you might be interested in, as well as by transportation mode. This is a fairly robust data set. It's being updated and new resources are being added all the time. And so I would encourage you to go to this particular website and subscribe for updates so you can stay connected and up to date and get notified as new resources are added. The bill section, resources section of the website, you'll find links to other numerous resources, specifically modal information. If you want to go to find out what programs Federal Highway Administration or Federal Rail Administration has, you can go to this particular website. It also provides information on the overall programs contained within the bipartisan infrastructure law that the White House has put together, not just related to transportation. This website, as well as several other locations on the DOT Navigator site, also includes state contacts for both state, local, federal contacts for transportation contacts within North Dakota. DOT Navigator also contains information to help you apply for the grants and understand. And there's just a ton of information on this website. It's too much to kind of go through right now. I'm going to pick on a couple of particular examples to visit about. One of them is at the bottom of this slide. It's the discretionary grant preparation checklist that US DOT has put together. And essentially this is a top 10 or greatest hits checklist based off of questions that USDOT has received over time. And I'm going to show that on the next slide here. The other resource I want to point out is a link on the left-hand side of this particular slide that would allow you to evaluate if federal funding is the right fit for your organization. As I mentioned before, federal funds come with federal requirements, and they're reimbursable. They typically require a match. And so this will give you, if you go to this link, there's a bunch of information out there that'll give you some insight as to what's going to be required if you are successful in obtaining a federal discretionary grant. This is the top 10 checklist. Again, it was based off of questions and feedback that USDOT has gotten from recipients and applicants over time. Each of these particular 10 items on the website has got a lot of information embedded underneath it. And so if you're interested in coordinating between agencies, you can go there and get more information on what exactly that means. I'm going to go into examples of two of these. One of them is the DOT funding calendar. And this particular website includes key notices of funding opportunity that are contained within bill. It includes anticipated open dates. Once it's opened, it includes a link to the notice of funding opportunity as well as the close date. I mentioned earlier that the website also includes modal administration. This particular link I provided gives you information that Federal Highway Administration has published out there regarding competitive grants. And then for rural communities, which is the vast majority of North Dakota, there's information in the routes program that provides detailed toolkits, resources, and other tools available specific for rural communities as you consider applying for discretionary grants. As I mentioned before, federal funds come with federal requirements. And so before you get too far into writing your grant application, ask yourself if federal funding is the right fit for your organization and project. USDOT wants to support as many projects and places as we can. However, we all recognize that state, local, other resources may be a better fit for your project than federal funds. If you do elect to pursue a federal grant, and hopefully you're successful, would highly recommend that you begin getting familiar with the 2 CFR 200 requirements. That's the Uniform Administrative Act. That is the Code of Federal Regulation that governs all USDOT awards. FHWA and the National Highway Institute recently published an online self-paced training specific to 2 CFR 200. It's 9 hours long. However, it's broken up into 5 or 6 modules that are fairly bite-sized. You can do those in an hour or two and get through that class in a couple of weeks. I took it. Thankfully, I passed. It was really a good class. I think it gave a lot of insight into 2 CFR 200. The other items I'll mention here, and they're in every NOFO, most webinars that USDOT puts on talks about this. As an applicant, make sure you're getting out to grants.gov and the System for Award Management, and make sure that you have your registration up to date in both of those applications. Grants.gov is how you submit your application, and it takes some time to get registered. So please don't wait until 2 days before the deadline and assume you're going to be able to get through that process and get registered. Same with sam.gov. Make sure your unique entity identification is up to date. We really hate to see good grant applications and good projects not be evaluated through the merit reviews and the other screenings simply because you weren't able to submit because of an administrative technicality. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. Here's some contact information for you. The email on the left-hand side is USDOT. You can email those folks if you have program-specific or project-specific questions. Again, I would encourage you to sign up, to subscribe for updates, make sure you're staying informed of the information that's coming out, new updates that are available. And then on the right-hand side of this particular slide is the information, the contact information for the local FHWA division office here in Bismarck. Feel free to email, feel free to call. If we can't answer your question, we can certainly get you hooked up with the right folks and get you pointed in the right direction to answer those specific questions. So with that, I turn it over to Mr. Scott Zainhofsky.
Thank you, Kraig. As Kraig said, I'm Scott Zainhofsky. I'm the Planning Asset Management Division Engineer for North Dakota DOT. And hopefully my slides will be up here shortly, but basically my team develops the grant applications and manages consultants that develop grant applications for the North Dakota Department of Transportation. But it is a massive team effort. We absolutely rely on the subject matter experts across North Dakota DOT as we're preparing those grant applications. So my contact information is here on this slide, and it's also on the last slide of this presentation. The email address there is monitored by a team of folks, so even if I'm on vacation, there will be other people that will see it. So feel free to use that information. That's why it's there. And as the governor started out, I want to start out with some gratitude as well. I work with the absolute best grant acquisition team in the country as far as I'm concerned. On the left-hand side, you've already met her, Rebecca Geyer. Next to her on the bottom is Cullen Gress. He works on the benefit cost analyses on our grant applications. Above him is Dave Langgang. Next is Abby Lidke. She's an intern with us. And lastly on this slide, I've got Stuart Milakovic. These folks are, as I said, the ones that prepare the grant applications for North Dakota DOT, and they're fantastic. But as it says, this is really, truly a team effort. It absolutely takes both the grant writers and the technical experts in the areas in order to prepare a good grant application. So this is kind of the outline of my presentation today. I'm not going to belabor this slide at all, but I'll start out with, this isn't the Boy Scouts, but they have a great motto, be prepared. As Kraig mentioned, it can take a significant amount of time to get those identification numbers and the login information. Most federal grant applications require the application to be submitted through grants.gov, and they also require that you have those unique entity identifiers or the TINs. The vast majority of public agencies already have at least the UEI and the EINs and the TINs. If you don't know that number, talk to your finance director or your auditor. If you literally don't have one, as Kraig said, see sam.gov, but it can take weeks or even months to get those numbers. So I would encourage you to apply for those numbers and that login information now. Don't wait for the notice of funding opportunity or the NOFO to come out to start applying for those, because you may not have them in time to actually apply. Also, remember that all federal construction funding requires NEPA or the National Environmental Policy Act clearances. So the earlier you can do that, the better off you are. Having those documents on the shelf is a great idea. Not only does it show that your project is ready to go, but it also is a great source of information as you're preparing those grant applications. Some grant programs at the federal level do have planning activities and allowable, and quite often planning is defined as anything prior to the bid on a federal grant program. So you can do the NEPA and the design work, but you could also do corridor studies and sub-area studies, those kinds of things on a lot of those programs. But the vast majority of the programs are really looking for shovel-ready kinds of projects that are ready to go out for construction. The other thing to be prepared about is that you likely are not going to get awarded the first time you submit your project for a grant program. Kraig said they're oversubscribed. Well, oversubscribed here means that we're talking 5 to 10 times as many applications as there is money available. So sometimes it can take 2, 3, 4 times submitting the same project before you actually get that project awarded. And this next piece of advice, read the NOFO. If you hear nothing else that I say today, hear this, please. read that NOFO, read it in detail, and follow those instructions that are in that NOFO. A lot of times there will be very specific fonts and page spacings and section breakouts and outlines and things like that that they want you to follow. And when a program has 5 to 10 times as many applications as there is money available, anything you can do to make your application easier for the reviewers to review, the easier it is for the reviewers to give you a good score. So keep that in mind. The next thing about NOFOs is, focus on the selection criteria. How does your project meet those selection criteria? Be creative as you're coming up with this. Obviously, don't lie. I mean, not only is it unethical, a lot of times it's illegal. I mean, it's fraud, right? But be creative. There's nothing wrong with submitting a project that is for reconstruction of a roadway that's reached the end of its useful life, but also describing that road as helping people get to the economic center of your town, right? And that's not lying. There's nothing about that. But if the NOFO has, economic development or economic support as one of its selection criteria, talk about how that road helps people get to your business district. Remember, typically federal funds can't be used in preparing a federal grant application, so make sure you're using your own funds. And lastly on this, submit early. We always plan to submit the day before the applications are due. As I said earlier, grants.gov is the system that you apply to. If that system happens to be down on the day that an application is due, that's your problem. That's not the federal granting agency's problem. And I mentioned my team earlier. Well, picking the right team makes a huge difference on preparing a good grant application. Applications are both technical and marketing, so you need those subject matter experts that can give you that data and help you tell what that story, or tell the story of what that project is doing, but you also need a good storyteller. So keep that in mind. And remember, there are lots of resources, not only within your agency, but also in the private sector. There are consultants out there that specialize in writing grant applications. And then Kraig kind of touched on this too. Pick the right project. Reading that NOFO and making sure that your project matches up with that, that grant program is key. So you really need 3 things when you're preparing a project or preparing to submit a project to a federal grant program. You need the scope. So what is that project trying to accomplish? That isn't, reconstructing a road. It's reconstructing a road to do X, Y, Z, whatever it is. It's about what that project is going to do for the traveling public and the people that you're trying to serve. You're also going to need your budget, and Kraig talked about this a little bit too. You need your total cost estimate, you need those funding sources lined up, and I would also suggest that you don't plan to apply for the maximum percentage allowable in the grant program. Most grant programs, as we said, have way more applications than they have money available. So as a result, most of those programs, you're going to be more competitive if you're applying for a smaller percentage of the total project. You also have to keep in mind the schedule and when you're picking your project. Remember that you need NEPA and design work, and you can assume on most projects that you're talking 12 to 18 months for each one of those. Now obviously smaller projects is going to take less, bigger projects take more, all of that kind of thing, but you can make that or use that as a good rule of thumb. In addition, we're finding that it takes basically 2 years from the time we submit the project until we have the money available to spend on most of the federal grant programs that we're receiving. So, don't plan on applying for a project that you need funding this summer in order to do it. So, and then, as I said earlier, match the selection criteria with your project. You know, there's no point, as it says here, in applying for a street reconstruction if it's a rail program. But at the same time, a less obvious example is that it doesn't make sense to apply for a street reconstruction if the focus of that grant program is bicycle pedestrian mobility, unless, of course, that street reconstruction is being done to provide that bicycle pedestrian mobility. And then partnerships matter. Request your letters of support from your partners early and give them a template to follow as they're preparing their letters of support for you. You know, as I say here, the reviewers likely aren't reading all of these letters, but they are taking note of who is providing those letters. And then granting agencies love partnerships, especially partnerships with the private sector. So, you know, it doesn't take a huge contribution from those private sector partners, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be money. But as long as you are partnering with those private sector individuals in as broad a group as you can, the better off you are. And the last piece of advice that I have on this partnership matters is notify both North Dakota DOT and your local federal agency that is responsible for that mode and that grant that you're submitting an application. And the reason for that isn't that we want to veto your application or anything goofy like that, but it's in case we get questions and then we are able to answer those questions. You know, it's not necessarily unusual for headquarters to contact the local division office and say, what do you know about this project? Obviously, it's better for you if they can say, yeah, it's a good project and here's why. In addition to that, we at North Dakota DOT have gotten requests from federal granting agencies asking us for additional information on an application with a 24 or 48-hour turnaround, and one of them wasn't even our project. We had, actually it's happened more than once, and we had, in one case, had no idea what the project even was, and after researching it and stuff, we were finally able to pass that on to the correct applicant and also notify the headquarters folks that, or the US DOT folks, that it wasn't our application. And my final point is, you know, plan to manage the grant. Kraig talked about this as well. You know, federal money is not the same as local money. There are a lot of strings attached to it, and those are attached to all federal funds. But in addition to that, there's reporting requirements that do come with the vast majority of these grant applications or grant programs. Typically, you're looking at 3 to 5 years of reporting after the project is complete, and these will be both financial reporting and project performance reporting. Planning projects typically require less reporting than the construction projects, and so if you're really worried about these kinds of activities, I'd suggest maybe cutting your teeth on one of those planning projects. It'll be a little bit easier for you to sort of work into it and build up to it. And then finally, remember the resources that are available. Kraig did a great job of covering the US DOT resources that are out there. In addition to that, I'd encourage you to remember the federal awarding agency is available too, those local offices. You know, nobody is interested in seeing any project fail. Those federal agencies don't want to give you money and then only have to take it back a couple years later. So talk to those folks, you know, use the resources that they have available to help you. We at North Dakota DOT are available to support you as well. We're typically not going to be able to submit applications for you or manage the funds for you, but there are other things that we can do, offering technical advice and advice on preparing the grant applications and those kinds of things. And finally, again, remember the consulting industry is out there as well to help with managing these projects as well. So with that, I hope you all brought your questions because as promised, we're looking at roughly half the time available for you to ask us questions. And again, my contact information is there. Please use it. Thank you.
Thank you. And again, we're not going to be able to talk about specific grant programs and projects, but, you know, test us. I'm going to run around with the mic here.
We're good. From a local city perspective, how would you suggest we balance that, I guess, investment of resources for that preliminary engineering, for that NEPA documentation, when we don't know if there's a project at the end of this that we'll be able to show that we're going to construct this magnificent piece of infrastructure that we're planning for, because it is entirely reliant on securing that pretty big federal grant. Can you maybe speak to some of that, either of you?
Well, I can start out and then I'll let Kraig jump in. We're wrestling with that same thing at North Dakota DOT, quite frankly. Where we're sitting right now is that we are developing a list of projects that for the next 4 or 5 years, we're only going to fund them if we get a grant for them. And then we're working them into our normal project development processes. I think the more you can use the processes that you already have established and that you're already using on a regular basis, the better off you're going to be, and because it just less disruption of your normal processes and your normal activities. But it is a challenge for sure, and like I said earlier, it can take 3, 4, 5 times applying before you actually get awarded, and it is a bunch of upfront investment. But the other thing, if you pick projects that you think you're eventually going to want to do, then it's not wasted effort anyway.
I don't know that I have any more to add to that. It is definitely a challenge as you consider a grant application that can only be funded, or a project that can only be funded with grant funds. And I think Scott gave great advice. Pick a project that you want to do eventually. It won't be wasted effort, but recognize that, as we've said, they're oversubscribed. It's hyper competitive, and just be willing to accept some of that moving forward. The more work you can do up front to show that the project is ready to go, as Scott said, shovel ready, I think makes your project more competitive in those processes.
Okay, anyone else? Raise your hand if you have a question. Really test me here. Pick a time when I'm walking away from you. No, I'm kidding. Sitar.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks for the presentation. Is there a specific part of these grants that you would recommend universities to look into, and how do you propose we reach out to state agencies to go after this? Should we wait for them to reach out to us when they need help preparing a grant, or should it be the other way around? If that made sense.
Yeah, since I'm the state agency rep, I'll take the first shot at that. I guess, I don't think I would wait necessarily for us to reach out in asking for help. But as far as the particular grant programs, I think it's just watching the NOFOs, watching the opportunities. I do monitor those, and I have sent some out to you, as you're aware, Sitar. But I think it's really about picking the project that matches the grant program. And so if you have something in mind that you want to research, for example, that you think would be beneficial to the DOT, we're obviously always willing to talk about that and support you and your grant applications.
Again, Scott did a great job. I am going to put a plug in here, and I'm going to make myself a liar to what I just said a few minutes ago, but the Safe Streets and Roads for All program includes action plans and includes implementation grants. And the DOT is not an eligible applicant for that particular program. And this last cycle, there was a significant amount of money that was left on the table for development of action plans. And so would encourage local governments that are interested in safety, and we heard Governor Burgum talk about it earlier, Vision Zero, there's going to be a significant amount of money available for development of action plans through that Safe Streets and Roads for All program. And that NOFO is going to get published here in the next couple months, probably with an application deadline thereafter. So again, that particular program is out there and available, and would encourage you to research and look into it.
Thanks, Craig. That reminds me that's a great point. You know, universities are going to struggle with construction grants, but that Safe Streets and Roads for All, with its significant planning component, is a perfect kind of project for or program for universities to consider. And there are a lot of local agencies out there that simply don't have the resources to put together a good grant application or even manage federal funds. And so there's a big help there. NDSU, in fact, Upper Great Plains got a Safe Streets and Roads for All grant funded to them to help look at gravel road systemic safety issues. So I think it's great.
And implementation of a project, you can't apply for an implementation grant unless you have an approved action plan. So the action plan is the first step to actually delivering a safety project on the road.
I'm going to put a plug in here. You guys both answered that very well, but I'm going to put a plug in for the universities to think about innovations that maybe could tag on to applications that the state puts in. We have generally and I'm not going to say it's in all grants, but generally we're looking for innovation for funding for project development or project implementation, or I'm missing one, darn it. It's innovation on the program delivery or the project delivery, the funding.
And technology.
And tech. I completely gapped on the tech, and I'm standing next to the person who can help us with that. So if you could help suggest innovations to us at any point in time, we'd be very willing to have that conversation. Another item, I was reminded that Scott and a team of our folks are putting together a website on NDDOT's web to give you the same kind of resources you saw on the federal side, but on the state side for the local partners. And I'll take more questions.
Yeah, and while Rebecca's walking across the room, that website should hopefully be up in the next couple of months and available for you. I'll make that link available to whoever wants it when it's out there.
My question refers to getting rejected or denied your application. Are you given the opportunity to improve it? Do you meet with anybody, whoever denied your application?
Absolutely, great question, Kay, thank you. There is an opportunity for any applicant that is not successful in obtaining grant funds to get a debrief from either USDOT, I've never been through the process, Scott, so I'll turn to you to make sure I'm saying this right, from USDOT, the program manager at headquarters, to understand what the reviewer saw in the application and why it wasn't funded. So yeah, definitely would take advantage of that opportunity.
Yeah, that's a great question and a great point. We always ask for those debriefs. They are valuable. You know, even on the applications that we've received, we typically have submitted more than one application to a particular program. So we ask for a debrief on all of them because there's always something that we can improve and something that we can learn for the next round. And especially, like I said, you know, it takes 2, 3, 4 times sometimes submitting the same project for a program. Well, what better resource than the actual people that were reviewing the application to tell you how to improve it for the next time when you do submit it.
So I'm not sure if this is more of a question or just kind of a brainstorming. You talked about the DOT putting together a website on grant funding, and I know some of the discussions we've had is if you're able to put a grant together where there's partnerships, right? If it's a city, county, state, or a state-county type of project, is that website, could that be a central repository to know what's out there? Because if you're Burleigh County, you may not necessarily know what's in DOT's transportation plan or vice versa. And there might be some opportunities to be able to work together in some of those areas, but could DOT be a central repository to be able to include those plans or include those projects to see if there may be a NOFO that would be available for partners? So I don't know if that's a question or just more of an idea to throw out to consider.
It sounded like an idea, but on its surface, I like it. I'm certainly going to consider that as we roll out the second version of the website. It won't be on the first one because I hadn't thought of it, and frankly, I want to get that website out and live for folks. But it's definitely worth considering.
Okay, if you have a question, anything about grants, raise your hand. Or yell out Rebecca. Or I could just do laps. Oh.
Scott, when DOT submits on a grant, can you maybe just give a range of how, like the effort that is on your side, whether it's your man hours or, you know, consultant fees or whatever that is, just to get a feel if that's a $10,000 thing or a $100,000 thing or a 2 hours or 700 hours kind of thing?
Sure. Our in-house hours, Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're talking probably 50, 60 person hours, somewhere in that ballpark. When we hire a consultant, it depends on the grant program and how much information is available for that project, but we're looking anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 typically. It can be a little bit higher than that, but.
I hate to correct you, Scott.
No,
but
please do.
I think it's more like 50, 60 for 2 or 3 people. One person puts in about 20. Ish, and it depends on the type of program because, and he probably already said this, but there are some grant programs out there that take 5-page narratives. So that's not something we have to throw the whole kitchen sink at, but our team does, on occasion on the big grants, spend 50, 60 hours apiece.
Okay, so you're talking more like 100 to 120 person hours? Is that what you said? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. That's why I asked you to correct me.
Any other questions? Danae has a question. I'm running.
I just have a question on match funding, because I know there's some legislation that's going through right now that the state might possibly have, and so when it comes to these potential partnerships and all of these entities, including tribes, cities, counties, is there the opportunity for like a tribe to write a grant and the state to pick up that 20% if it would come to like a Safe Streets for All grant where the state can't apply?
Right now, we are very limited in our ability to do that. As you mentioned, there's a bill before the legislature talking about the Flexible Transportation Fund. That would give us the potential opportunity to do some of that. We have not worked through the details of how we would make those decisions. All I can say is ask. And the worst we can do is say, no, sorry, we're not able to do that. But our ability to do that is going to be limited with the funding that we do have available. And right now, we have legal limitations as well.
We got plenty of time for more questions. Anyone? The presentations were just that good. Lee has a question.
So it's for either one of you. So you mentioned the planning grants can be used on anything up to construction, right? So if you're putting together a planning grant, that could also cover your environmental document?
Under most programs, yes, the environmental document could be something that you would apply for as a planning grant. The other thing that a number of programs will allow is even the construction project to have the planning components ahead of time, or as part of that same grant. Obviously, the more information you have available, the easier it is for you to write your application, and the easier it is for the awarding agencies to award it, things like that. But yes, typically on a planning grant, anything prior to the bid of the project would be allowable. While folks are thinking of other questions, one of the things that I sort of skipped over in the interest of time is that when you're thinking about the project that you're submitting for a particular grant program, think about the benefit cost analysis. There are some programs out there that have statutory requirements that the benefit cost ratio is greater than 1. If that is a requirement in that program and your benefit cost ratio on your project comes out less than 1, you may as well not submit that project to that grant program, because the awarding agency just won't have the ability to award it to you. And we are finding too that the benefit cost analysis is not a place to be creative. Follow the federal guidance exactly on the benefit cost analysis, because USDOT has economists, and they do modify the benefit cost analysis that is submitted if they don't agree with how you prepared it. So the moral there is save that project for a different grant program. Don't give up on the project.
Anybody have any other questions? Anyone? Anyone? Bueller? Wait. Sorry. Looks like we're getting close to finishing time, but we do have a few more minutes to address 1 or 2 more questions.
So Scott, just to clarify, if a benefit cost analysis has to be greater than 1, right, that's what you said? It will say that in the NOFO, because sometimes they use benefit cost analysis, but it doesn't actually have to come out to be that. It's just used as an indicator of whether it's cost beneficial. So it'll actually say if it has to be that, correct?
Yes, thank you for that clarification. If that wasn't clear up front, it gets back to what I said during my presentation. Read the NOFO. Sometimes it'll just say something to the effect of the project should be economically viable or something to that effect. Other times it will literally say the benefit cost ratio needs to be greater than 1. It's those projects or those grant programs that say the benefit cost ratio needs to be greater than 1 are the ones that I was talking about.
Any other questions? If not, you have Scott's contact information up here, and Kraig posted his earlier. I don't want to screw up with 2 mics active here. So I'll just run up here and say thank you everyone for attending this afternoon. Appreciate it. Hope you got some valuable information for grants, and if you have any questions, you know where to find us. Thank you.